Okay, folks, we're going to talk about cash for keys and why it's a problematic strategy. So we'll be using a very basic game theory and the Nash equilibrium, named after John Forbes Nash Jr. You probably heard about Nash. He was depicted in the film starring Russell Crowe called The Beautiful Mind, and The Beautiful Mind was adapted by Sylvia Nasr's biography of the same name. So the depiction of Nash was imperfect, but that's outside of the scope of this talk. Needless to say, Nash is was an important contributor to our knowledge of game theory and economics. All right, so this first slide, we're just introducing the players. We have landlord Larry and property Paul. So they're both considering holding the line with their tenant and waiting for eviction court. This is a particularly difficult strategy now because of the eviction moratorium. But the second strategy, called cash for keys, predates the pandemic eviction moratorium. So that's why we're talking about it. It's not brand new, but it's kind of it's in vogue now because there's so few options. So cash for keys just involves paying a problem tenant to leave, forgiving past debt and paying them to leave. All right, so what happens on our graph if they institute a combination of these strategies? Let's take a look. Now I want you to look at this. You can make your own conclusions quickly, jumping around, but I'll guide you through it. The numbers are made up. The point is not to talk about specific numbers, but instead to get the theory behind why cash for keys will ruin the rental property business. All right, so let's go to the ideal strategy, right? There it is. The ideal strategy is for Larry and Paul to both hold the line. Why? They take a short-term loss from holding the line because they have to wait to evict, but they will eventually have a large long-term gain. They've got a good rental property, and they're gonna use it to their advantage. Problem tenants will face consequences, and they'll eventually find it hard to find housing. And they will either shape up and behave, or they will have to live with substandard housing options in the future. So this is the ideal. This is the system working. Unfortunately, and we'll see that, both Larry and Paul, or Paul and Larry, the way the arrows went, they have an incentive to do cash for keys. So you draw your attention to these two new arrows. If Paul or Larry offers cash for keys, but the other player does not, then they limit their short-term loss, and they still get their long-term gain. And this is achieved by selling or renting to a new tenant. So since neither player knows what the other is going to do, they both take the strategy to offer cash for keys, and they both end up in the final quadrant and our last arrow. Okay, so this is called the Nash equilibrium. They both opted for a strategy that is the worst outcome for both parties. You can think of it as like they switched bad tenants. If these were the only two landlords in the world, they would basically be switching tenants. They would embolden tenants to not pay. They would, every tenant would wait to be paid by their landlord. So obviously the world has more than two rental property investors, but once you look at this model, you kind of begin to understand how cash for keys will ultimately hurt our industry, even if it may benefit an individual investor now and then. So what we have here is called a collective action problem. Both Larry and Paul can agree to hold the line. They will have better long-term profits. So I'm posting this video to several landlord groups. I do not know anyone's personal situation. If your business is circling the drain, you may have to consider cash for keys. But just know that if you elect to regularly use it as a strategy and your fellow landlords do the same, all property investors will lose. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I have a bunch more content I'm creating and using, and I encourage you to check it out on my main page, or I post it to a lot of groups, and eventually I'll get a YouTube channel. So I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Benjamin Hart. Thank you.